Angela stood at the edge of the ocean, the warm Bahamian breeze curling around her like a silent embrace. The sun bled gold across the sky, casting its final farewell on the waves, but the beauty of it barely touched the aching hollow in her chest. She had come here to escape, to breathe, to forget. But heartbreak had a way of following you no matter how far you ran. Her mind was a battlefield of memories. Him whispering promises into her ear under the moonlight, his hands laced with hers, his voice a lullaby of forever. And then the betrayal, the cold, sharp sting of realization when she found out she was just another temporary fixture in his life, another woman he could love until something better came along. Angela had loved him deeply, given him parts of herself she could never reclaim. And now, standing on this foreign shore, she realized she wasn't just mourning the relationship. She was mourning the woman she had been when she was with him. Angela? The voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, blinking against the golden light, and found herself staring at a familiar face, Mr. Hinata. It had been years since she had seen him. Back in college, he had been the quiet but brilliant exchange student from Japan, always observing, always analyzing. They had bonded over long study sessions in the library, both striving for something bigger than themselves. Now, he stood before her, older, sharper, success written into the confident lines of his face. "I almost didn't recognize you," she admitted, forcing a smile. "Time does that," Hinata replied, a knowing look in his eyes. They fell into easy conversation, reminiscing about the past, the dreams they once shared. But Hinata saw something in her that others hadn't noticed, the exhaustion behind her smile, the weight pressing against her shoulders. "You don't look like you're just here for a vacation," he said after a pause. Angela exhaled, looking back at the water. "I needed to get away." "From?" She hesitated. The words felt too raw, too heavy. But somehow, with him, she didn't need to pretend. "From a life that doesn't feel like mine anymore." Hinata studied her for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card. "My company in Japan is expanding," he said. "I need strong, talented people like you." She blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, are you offering me a job?" "Yes." His tone was calm, but there was something deeper there. A door being opened, a lifeline being thrown. Angela let out a breathless laugh. "Hinata, I don't even speak Japanese. I've never even thought about moving." "Then think about it now," he interrupted gently. "You're in a place where you're questioning everything. Maybe it's time to rebuild somewhere new." His words settled in her chest, a spark igniting in the darkness. A new country, a new life. Could she really do it? That night, she lay awake in her hotel room, staring at the ceiling. Her heart felt like a house that had been burned down, nothing but ashes left behind. She had spent so much time loving someone else that she had forgotten how to love herself. Maybe she was meant to stay broken. Or maybe she could start over. The thought terrified her. But wasn't she already afraid? What was left for her in the States, except memories she couldn't outrun? She picked up Hinata's card, tracing the embossed letters. Her ex had taken everything from her. But this decision, this was hers. And for the first time in a long time, Angela chose herself. Angela never realized how loud silence could be until she stepped off the plane in Tokyo. The air was different, colder, the language unfamiliar, a sea of syllables that rushed past her ears, leaving her struggling to grasp even a single word. The city buzzed with energy, yet she felt like a ghost walking through it. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. At the airport, she clutched the handle of her suitcase like a lifeline. her heart pounding with the weight of what she had just done. She had left everything, her past, her pain, her home. And now, she was a stranger in a place that did not know her, a place that did not care. A gentle voice broke through her thoughts. "Angela!" She turned and saw Mr. Hinata and his wife, Fumiko, waving at her with warm smiles. Relief washed over her like a flood, and before she could think, she was in the Fumiko's arms, a soft, comforting embrace that made her chest ache. "Welcome home," Fumiko murmured. Home. Angela swallowed hard. She didn't have a home anymore. But maybe, just maybe, she could build one here. The first few weeks in Japan were a whirlwind of struggles. Angela fumbled through the language. Grocery shopping felt like a battle, and ordering food was an ordeal of nerves and mistranslations. The simplest tasks, buying a train ticket, finding her way home, asking for help, left her feeling helpless. There were days she felt utterly invisible in the crowds, drowning in the rush of a city that moved too fast. There were nights she sat in her apartment, staring at the unfamiliar walls, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. But there was Fumiko. There was Mr. Hinata, who made sure she was adjusting at work, gently correcting her mistakes with patience instead of frustration. And there was work, something she could throw herself into, something that gave her purpose when everything else felt uncertain. The pain of her past still lingered, but every day she chipped away at it. She refused to break. One night, after an exhausting workday, Fumiko pulled Angela aside and handed her a steaming bowl of miso soup. "You're strong, but you don't have to do everything alone," she said softly. Angela almost broke down right then and there. She hadn't realized how much she needed those words, how much she had been holding in. She was so used to being the one who had to be okay, the one who had to carry her own weight without complaint. That night, as she ate with Fumiko and Hinata, laughter filling the air, Angela felt something shift inside her. For the first time since arriving in Japan, she didn't feel like a stranger. She felt like she belonged. Weeks turned into months. Angela found her rhythm at work, growing in confidence. She learned to navigate the city without fear. She even started understanding bits and pieces of Japanese, enough to greet neighbors and order food without panicking. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Then, everything changed. It happened on an ordinary morning. Angela was sipping her coffee at her desk when the announcement came. The company had been bought out. The name of the new owner sent a chill through the office. Akira Kazuya, a man wrapped in secrecy and power. A billionaire who broke companies down and rebuilt them in his image. Whispers spread like wildfire. He's ruthless. A Casanova, always surrounded by women. No one ever really knows what he's thinking. Angela didn't care about his reputation. What she cared about was what came next. Who would survive the takeover? Who would be left standing? As the days passed, tension thickened in the office. Employees waited for the inevitable restructuring, for the changes that would shake the foundation of everything they had built. Angela tried to ignore the fear gnawing at her, tried to focus on her work. The air in the office was thick with tension, like the calm before a typhoon. The whispers had begun the moment the news broke, the hushed conversations in the break room. They spoke of him like he was a legend, a myth wrapped in scandal and supremacy. He's ruthless. He doesn't keep dead weight. Always surrounded by women, but never keeps any of them. They say no one knows what he's thinking. He never shows emotion. Angela didn't care. She had survived betrayal, survived heartbreak. She had clawed her way out of the abyss and rebuilt herself from the ashes. She wasn't about to crumble at the feet of some billionaire with a god complex. When he finally arrived, one moment, the office hummed with its usual rhythm, and the next, he was there, tall, imposing, exuding a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The air seemed to shift around him, as though the very walls acknowledged his presence. Akira Kazuya walked like he owned the ground beneath him. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, he was every inch the man the rumors painted him to be. Rich, powerful, and devastatingly untouchable. His face was unreadable, sharp features cut from glass, lips pressed into a firm line. But it was his eyes that unsettled Angela the most. They weren't just dark, they were deep, quiet, watchful. The kind of eyes that miss nothing. And then they found hers. Angela didn't blink, didn't flinch. For the briefest second, something shifted in those black depths. A flicker of interest, amusement, challenge. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. Angela looked away first, not out of intimidation, but because she had no interest in being one of those women who melted under his gaze. Angela had expected Akira Kazuya to be distant, detached, a billionaire too busy to notice someone like her. She was wrong. He noticed her, and he made it very clear. It started subtly. A lingering glance across the conference room, a brush of presence whenever he passed by. Then, the direct approaches. "Angela Olsen," he said one evening, stepping into the elevator just before the doors closed. Her fingers tightened around the file she was holding. He knew her name. He leaned against the wall, watching her like she was an equation he was trying to solve. "How do you like Japan?" Angela didn't answer immediately, because she knew men like him, men who thought their money, their power, their reputation could bend people at will. Men who collected women like trophies. Men who left wreckage in their wake. So instead of answering, she simply lifted her eyes to his, her expression unreadable. I wasn't aware the CEO had time for small talk. Something flashed in his gaze, something dangerously close to amusement. Most people fawned over him, most people feared him. Angela Olsen was not most people, and he liked that too much. Akira was used to women falling for the image of him. The billionaire, the heartbreaker, the untouchable force of power and wealth. It was a mask he wore effortlessly, a role he played to perfection. But Angela didn't look at him like the others did. She wasn't interested in his money or his charm. She wasn't captivated by the flawless suits, the sports cars, or the whispered rumors. She saw through him. And that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. For the first time in his life, Akira wanted to be noticed not as a billionaire, not as a Casanova, but as a man. And he wasn't sure he knew how to make that happen. Angela tried to ignore him, but ignoring a man like Akira Kazuya was like ignoring a storm forming on the horizon. He was everywhere. One day, he would pass by her desk and make an offhanded remark about her work, just enough to let her know he was watching. Another day, he would sit across from her in a meeting, his gaze unwavering, unreadable. She tried to pretend it didn't affect her, tried to convince herself that she felt nothing when she caught him watching her from across the room. But deep down, buried beneath the walls she had built, something inside her shifted, because Akira Kazuya was not like the man who had broken her before. There was something unspoken in his eyes, something real, something damaged, and that was more dangerous than anything, because Angela knew what it was like to love a broken man, and she knew the cost. Akira Kazuya stood before the towering glass window of his penthouse, staring out at the Tokyo skyline. The city pulsed with life beneath him. Millions of people moving, breathing, surviving. And yet, in all that vastness, he had never felt more alone. He pressed a glass of whiskey to his lips, but the burn did nothing to numb the ache in his chest. It never did. The world knew him as a Casanova, a ruthless billionaire, a man untouchable by emotion. But no one knew the truth. No one except Asahi, the only person who had seen him at his weakest, the only one who knew the real reason why Akira kept up the facade of a man who didn't care, who didn't settle down, who surrounded himself with beautiful women but never let any of them too close. Because the truth was Akira Kazuya was broken, and no amount of money, power, or reputation could fix what was fundamentally wrong with him. From the moment Akira was born, his fate had been written in ink and steel. You are the Kazuya heir. You will carry this empire forward. It was not a request. It was not a dream. It was a duty. One that came with a single, unbreakable rule. A Kazuya heir must have a biological child to inherit the empire. But Akira couldn't. Not for lack of trying. Not for lack of medical intervention. It was a secret buried deep beneath layers of shame and silence. A secret that made him unworthy in his father's eyes. A secret that gave his stepmother all the leverage she needed to destroy him. You were never meant to lead. Her words had echoed in his mind for years. His father's second wife, Masaki Kazuya, was a woman of quiet cruelty. Where his father had been strict but fair, she was calculating and venomous. She had spent years chipping away at his position, waiting for the moment he would fall. And now, she had all the ammunition she needed. His infertility was his greatest weakness, and she knew it. Adoption was out of the question. A Kazuya heir had to be of blood, and with no heir, Akira's claim to the empire would crumble. Masaki was waiting, watching, for the moment he would fail, for the moment she could rip the legacy from his hands, and she would do it without hesitation. So, Akira did what he had to do. He played the role, the womanizer, the untouchable bachelor. He kept models, actresses, socialites, anyone who would keep the illusion alive, around him. Because as long as the world believed he was a playboy who refused to settle down, no one would question the truth. No one would see his weakness. No one would know he was broken. The whispers about his countless lovers, his fleeting affairs, his refusal to commit, he let them spread, because it was better than the alternative. Better than the shame of the truth. Better than the world knowing that Akira Kazuya could never be what he was meant to be. This can't last forever, Akira. Asahi leaned back against the leather couch in Akira's penthouse, swirling his whiskey lazily. Akira exhaled sharply. What do you suggest I do? Announce to the world that I'm a failure? That I can't give my father what he wants? That Masaki will have her way in the end? Asahi's dark eyes held something dangerously close to pity, and Akira hated it. You're not a failure, Asahi said, after a long pause. You just live in a world that refuses to let you exist outside its rules. Akira scoffed. That's a poetic way of saying I'm trapped. Asahi sighed. You're trapped because you're letting yourself be. There has to be another way, Akira. You can't just what? Akira cut him off, his voice sharper than he intended. Keep pretending, keep lying, keep playing this role until I have no choice but to watch my father's legacy burn? Silence, because they both knew there was no other way. Asahi set his glass down with a soft clink. You've built your entire world around this lie, but one day it's going to collapse. And when it does, he shook his head, you're not going to survive it. Akira didn't respond, because deep down he already knew. Then Angela happened. She was not part of the plan. She was not meant to matter. She was supposed to be like the others, just another employee, another face in the crowd, but she was none of those things. She was fire where he expected ice, strength where he expected submission, a challenge where he expected admiration, and she didn't care who he was, didn't care about the wealth, the rumors, the image. For the first time, Akira found himself standing in front of someone who saw through him. And that terrified him more than anything. Because if Angela threw the mask, what else could she see? Could she see the truth? Could she see the broken man beneath the empire? And if she did, would she still want him? Angela wasn't interested, and she made sure he knew it. The first time he spoke to her directly, she barely glanced at him before turning on her heel and walking away. The second time, when he asked if she had time for coffee, she simply replied, "I don't drink coffee." The third time, when he caught her in the hallway, blocking her path with an amused smirk, she folded her arms and stared up at him, her expression unreadable. "You're persistent." Akira only smiled. "I get what I want." Angela tilted her head slightly, her eyes cool and unwavering. "Then it's a good thing I'm not for sale." And with that, she walked past him without a second glance. Akira had never had to chase anyone before. Women gravitated toward him. They sought his attention, wanted to be near him, wanted to be claimed by him. Angela wanted absolutely nothing to do with him, and he found himself annoyingly obsessed with that fact. At first, it was just curiosity, a game. Why was she so determined to push him away? But the more she rejected him, the more he realized his wasn't a game. Angela liked the women who flitted in and out of his orbit. She was fire wrapped in steel. And for the first time in his life, Akira Kazuya wanted more. Angela didn't want to admit that she noticed him, but she did. She noticed the way he only ever looked at her, even when the office was full of people. She noticed the way he never flirted carelessly with her, the way he did with other women. How his voice was always measured, his words careful. She noticed how, no matter how many times she dismissed him, he never once acted entitled to her time. She expected arrogance, persistence that bordered on pressure. Instead, Akira Kazuya was patient, respectful, constant, and that terrified her more than anything. Because she knew men like him, men who knew how to make a woman feel safe before shattering her completely. And she had barely pieced herself back together. Akira realized something dangerous one evening, watching Angela work late from his office window. He wasn't interested in her because she was a challenge. He was interested in her because she wasn't one. She wasn't someone to be won over and claimed. She was someone to be earned. So he stopped chasing, and instead, he started proving. He proved it in the way he never spoke down to her, in the way he acknowledged her ideas in meetings when others dismissed them, in the way he made sure her workload was fair, that she wasn't being overrun by deadlines. And most of all, he proved it in the way he never demanded her time. He simply offered it and waited. It happened when she least expected it. Angela had been buried in work, exhausted, running on nothing but pure willpower. And then, a cup of hot chocolate landed softly on her desk. She blinked at it, confused. "I don't drink coffee, remember?" Akira said casually, standing beside her. She stared at him, stunned. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, small, thoughtful. Something in her chest cracked open just a little, and that was the moment she started to lose the battle. It was raining the night Angela finally saw Akira differently. She had been walking home from work when the storm hit, her umbrella doing little to keep her from getting completely drenched. And then, a car pulled up beside her. The passenger window rolled down, and there he was. "Get in," he said. Angela hesitated. She should have said no. She should have kept walking, ignored him the way she always did. But she didn't. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe it was the way his voice didn't hold an ounce of arrogance or expectation. So she got in. And that night, something shifted. Because for the first time since she met him, Angela didn't feel like she was running away. She felt like she was falling, and she had no idea how to stop it. Akira sat in his penthouse, the dim city lights casting shadows across the marble floor. He gripped the glass of whiskey in his hand, swirling the liquid absent-mindedly, but his mind was somewhere else, or rather, on someone else. Across from him, lounging lazily on the couch, Asahi watched him with a knowing smirk. "You're doing it again," Asahi remarked. Akira didn't look up. "Doing what?" "Thinking about her." Akira exhaled sharply, setting his glass down with a clink. "You're imagining things." Asahi snorted. "Please, I've known you too long to believe that. You're obsessed with this woman." Akira's jaw tightened. "It's not an obsession." "No?" Asahi raised an eyebrow. "Then why do you look for her every time you walk into the office? Why do you care what she thinks of you? Why are you losing sleep over a woman who won't even give you the time of day?" Silence. For the first time in years, Akira had no clever retort. Because Asahi was right. Angela wasn't just another passing fancy. She wasn't just a woman he found attractive. She was the only woman who had ever made him feel something real. And that terrified him. After a long pause, Akira finally admitted, voice low, almost hesitant, "She's different." Asahi smirked, leaning forward. "Different? How?" Akira let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. "She doesn't care about who I am. She doesn't try to impress me. She challenges me without even realizing it." He exhaled, shaking his head. "I keep telling myself to let it go, but every time I see her, You fall harder." Asahi finished it for him. Akira said nothing, because they both knew it was true. Asahi wasn't the kind of friend who meddled, but this was different. He had never seen Akira like this, not with any woman. For years, he had watched Akira bury himself in his facade, hiding behind wealth, status, and meaningless encounters. But Angela made him human. And Asahi knew that if Akira didn't get out of his own way, he would lose her before he even had the chance. So he took matters into his own hands. Angela was having lunch alone in the company cafe when Asahi slid into the seat across from her, setting his coffee down with a casual ease. She barely glanced at him. "Should I be concerned that the CEO's best friend is sitting at my table?" Asahi grinned. "I'd be offended if you weren't." Angela rolled her eyes but took a sip of her tea, waiting. She knew who Asahi was, Akira's closest confidant, his shadow, the only man who probably knew what truly went on behind that unreadable face. She also knew that Asahi didn't do things without a reason. "All right," she said, setting her cup down. "What do you want?" Asahi smirked. "Straight to the point. No wonder he likes you." Angela stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but you do." He leaned back, studying her. "You're not an idiot, Angela. You know Akira isn't the man the rumors make him out to be." Angela didn't answer, because the truth was, she did know. She had seen the way he treated people when no one was watching. The way he spoke to his employees, not as pawns, but as people. The way he never crossed the line with her, no matter how many times she pushed him away. And worst of all, she had seen the way he looked at her. Like she was something more. Like she was the one thing he wanted but couldn't have. Asahi saw the hesitation flicker across her face, and for the first time he softened. "Angela," he said, voice quieter now, "I'm not here to play matchmaker. I'm not here to tell you how to feel, but I've known Akira for a long time, and I've never seen him like this before." Angela swallowed. "Like what?" "Like he actually cares." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Then, Asahi leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I know you don't trust him. I know you've been hurt before, but don't punish him for someone else's mistakes." Angela looked away, her fingers tightening around her cup. Because those words hit too close. "I have to go," she murmured, standing up. But as she walked away, Asahi smiled to himself. because he had seen the way she hesitated. And that meant he had already won. That night, Akira noticed something had changed. Angela didn't look at him the same way. She still avoided him, still kept her distance, but something about her felt different, less rigid, less closed off. And when their eyes met across the office that evening, she didn't look away first, and for the first time, Akira felt hope. Angela didn't realize it at first, didn't realize how it was happening, how the walls she had built so carefully, the ones meant to keep Akira out, to keep herself safe, were beginning to weaken. It was in the small things. The way he always made sure she had eaten before pulling all-nighters at work. The way he would subtly slide her an extra blanket when the office air conditioning was unbearable. The way he never tried to own her time, but always made it clear that he wanted it. He never pushed, but he never left either. One evening, she found herself alone in the break room, exhaustion pulling at her bones as she sipped her tea. She barely registered his presence until he spoke. "You look like you could use something stronger than tea." Angela glanced up to find Akira leaning against the counter, arms crossed, watching her with those dark, knowing eyes. She sighed. "Unfortunately, company policy frowns upon tequila during work hours." A smirk tugged at his lips. "A shame. I think you'd make an interesting drunk." Angela snorted despite herself. "I'm not that fun." He tilted his head slightly. "I don't believe that." Something about the way he said it, not teasing, not arrogant, just honest, made her chest tighten. She looked down at her cup, fingers tightening around the porcelain. "I don't know how to do this." His voice softened. "Do what?" Angela exhaled slowly. "Let my guard down. Trust someone again." Akira was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped closer, just enough for her to feel his warmth. "You don't have to trust me all at once," he murmured. "Just let me be here." Her throat felt tight, because no one had ever said that to her before. No one had ever given her the space to go at her own pace. And maybe, just maybe, that was why she was starting to fall. It had been a long day, a stressful, exhausting, soul-sucking kind of day that made her question why she was still in this job, in this city, in this life. By the time she left the office, it was raining. Hard. Angela stood outside the building, staring at the downpour, realizing too late that she had forgotten her umbrella at her desk. Perfect. She exhaled, resigning herself to the inevitable, and took a step forward. When a black umbrella suddenly appeared over her head, she turned, startled, and found Akira standing beside her, holding it out without a word. "You," she frowned. "Why are you still here?" His lips curved slightly. "I had a feeling you'd forget your umbrella." Angela narrowed her eyes. "That's suspiciously specific." Akira shrugged, a teasing glint in his gaze. "Maybe I'm just always prepared." She wanted to fight it, wanted to hold onto her usual resistance. But then he reached for her hand, not forcefully, not possessively, just gently, wrapping his fingers around hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. And instead of pulling away, she let him. They walked in silence, his warmth bleeding into her skin, the sound of rain filling the space between them. And in that moment, Angela knew she was falling, against her will, against her fears, and there was no stopping it now. She didn't expect him to be funny, didn't expect Akira Kazuya, the intimidating, unreadable CEO, to be the kind of man who could make her laugh until her stomach hurt. But somehow he did. One evening, after an exhausting meeting, they found themselves alone in his office, discussing the company's expansion plans. Angela was half asleep, barely processing anything. Akira smirked. "Are you even listening?" "Of course," she muttered, blinking at the spreadsheet in front of her. Something about market projections and stuff? He raised an eyebrow. Stuff? Yes, very important business stuff. He chuckled, shaking his head. Maybe you need coffee. Angela groaned. I need sleep, a vacation, and possibly a time machine to undo the last 12 hours of my life. Akira leaned back in his chair, watching her with amusement. You know, I don't think I've ever met anyone who speaks to me like this. She smirked. What? Like a human? Exactly. She was about to make another sarcastic remark when suddenly he reached over and flicked her forehead. Angela gasped, eyes wide. Did you just... Akira grinned. You looked like you were falling asleep. Oh, you're dead. Before she could think, she grabbed one of the throw pillows from the couch and smacked him with it. The shock on his face was priceless. For a second, the air went completely still. Then, Akira laughed. Not the usual low chuckle she had heard before. A real laugh. Deep, genuine, unrestrained. And something about it made her chest tighten. Because in that moment, he wasn't Akira Kazuya, the CEO. He wasn't the billionaire, the businessman, the enigma. He was just a man. And for the first time, Angela let herself see him. It was a slow descent. Not the kind of love that hit all at once like a storm, but the kind that crept in quietly, settling into the spaces she had left empty for too long. She found herself looking for him in meetings. She found herself listening for his voice in crowded rooms. She found herself wanting to be near him, and when she wasn't, she missed him. But love was never easy. Not when there were secrets between them. Not when there were things he wasn't telling her. Not when she had spent so many years protecting herself from men like him. And yet, none of that seemed to matter anymore. Because somewhere along the way, Angela had stopped fighting it. Somewhere along the way, she had fallen in love with Akira Kazuya, and she didn't know if she would ever be able to go back. It was as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them. Days bled into nights, and nights into mornings, with Angela and Akira existing in their own quiet universe. They spent evenings talking until dawn. Conversations shifting from business to childhood memories, to dreams neither had dared speak aloud before. They stole moments between meetings, fingers brushing in passing, glances that spoke volumes. And when the world grew too loud, too demanding, they found solace in each other. It was seamless, natural, like they had always belonged together, like nothing could break them, like they were unshakable. But Akira knew better, because he was keeping something from her, and with every passing day, the weight of it grew heavier. Angela had never felt this before. Not like this. Not the kind of love that felt like it was carved into her soul, like it lived in the marrow of her bones. Akira wasn't perfect. He was complex, unreadable at times, closed off in ways that frustrated her. But he was also the man who made her laugh when she wanted to cry. The man who held her hand beneath dinner tables. The man who looked at her like she was his entire world. She had never felt safer in someone's presence, never felt more seen. And that terrified her, because love like this, love this deep, it could break her. And yet, she couldn't stop herself. She didn't want to stop herself. Akira held her in his arms one night, her head resting against his chest. You know, she murmured, her voice laced with drowsy affection, I used to think I'd never trust anyone again. Akira's body tensed. She didn't notice. I thought love was just something people used as an excuse to hurt each other, she continued. But then you happened. A sharp pang went through his chest. He closed his eyes, fingers brushing through her curls. Angela? He hesitated. This was it. The moment he should tell her. Tell her he couldn't give her the life she deserved. Tell her he couldn't give her a family. Tell her his love had an expiration date. Instead, he whispered, nothing, because he was a coward, and he didn't want to lose her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He had the ring. He had been carrying it for weeks, hidden in the depths of his dresser, the weight of it burning against his conscience every time he touched it. He had envisioned it, kneeling before her, telling her she was the only thing that had ever mattered, slipping the ring onto her finger and watching her say yes. He could almost hear it. Yes, Akira. 1,000 times. Yes. But then what? Then his father would demand an heir. Then his stepmother would laugh in his face. Then Angela would find out. And then he would lose her. He gripped the velvet box in his palm, staring at it in the dim light of his bedroom. For the first time in his life, Akira Kazuya, the man who had everything, had never felt more powerless. Asahi was the only person who knew. And now, watching Akira fall deeper and deeper for Angela, Asahi saw what was coming. The breaking point. You have to tell her, Asahi said one evening, sitting across from Akira at a private bar. Akira didn't respond, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. You can't keep pretending this isn't an issue, Asahi pressed. What happens when she wants a family? When she starts asking questions? Akira's grip tightened around the glass. She doesn't need to know. Asahi sighed. And when she finds out? Akira exhaled slowly. Then I lose her. Not telling her is what's going to make you lose her. Akira set his drink down hard. You think I don't know that? Asahi's expression softened. You love her. Akira ran a hand over his face. More than I should. Then trust her, Asahi said, because if you don't, this love you're holding on to so tightly, it's already slipping away. Akira didn't answer, because deep down he already knew. Akira sat in his office, staring at the contract in front of him, but the words blurred together. He hadn't been able to focus for days, because he knew the moment was coming, the moment where everything would fall apart. Angela's laughter still lingered in his ears from the night before. Her warmth still clung to his skin, but he felt the weight of his own deception pressing down on him like chains. Tell her, Asahi had warned, before someone else does. But how could he? How could he look into her eyes, the only place he had ever felt safe, and tell her that he had been lying this whole time? How could he lose her? He wasn't ready. He would never be ready. And so he stayed silent. And that was his biggest mistake. Masaki Kazuya always knew how to play her cards. She had spent years watching Akira from the shadows, waiting for the day his empire would collapse under the weight of his own failure. And now she had found his weakness, Angela Olsen, the woman who had unraveled the untouchable Akira Kazuya. Masaki smirked as she watched the file slide across her desk. Find everything you can on her. Because if there was one thing she had learned in this family, love was the easiest thing to destroy. Angela was at her desk when she got the call. Unknown number. Something in her gut twisted. She answered, Hello? Silence for a moment. Then, a woman's voice, smooth as silk and laced with venom. Ms. Olsen, I assume. I'm calling as a courtesy. Angela's grip tightened around her phone. Courtesy for what? A soft chuckle. For your sake? I'd suggest you walk away from Akira before he breaks you. Angela's blood turned to ice. Who the hell is this? She snapped. Someone who knows him better than you ever will. Someone who knows what he's been hiding. Angela's heart pounded. You're lying. Am I? A pause. Tell me, Angela, has he told you about his condition? About the fact that no matter how deeply he loves you, he will never be able to give you what you deserve? Has he told you what his father's empire will do to women like you? Women who can't give them an heir? Angela's breath caught, and that was all Masaki needed. If you don't believe me, ask him yourself. Click. The line went dead, but Angela's world had already begun to crack. Angela burst into Akira's penthouse, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "Akira!" she called, her voice sharper than she meant. Akira appeared in the doorway, his shirt unbuttoned, his hair slightly tousled, like he had just run his hands through it. But the moment he saw her face, his expression darkened. "Angela, what's wrong?" She threw her phone on the counter. "You tell me." Akira's eyes flickered to the phone, then back to her. "Angela." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say my name like that. Tell me the truth." He exhaled slowly, stepping closer. "Who called you?" "Someone who knows more about you than I do," she said, voice shaking. "Someone who said you've been keeping secrets from me." Akira's jaw clenched. She stared at him, searching his face, for honesty, for reassurance, for anything that could erase the cold dread creeping up her spine. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Are you—" She swallowed, forcing herself to say it. "Are you incapable of having children?" The silence that followed felt like a death sentence. Akira's lips parted, but no words came out. Angela felt the air leave her lungs. "Oh my God. You were never going to tell me, were you?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut deeper than any scream. Akira ran a hand through his hair, his face a mixture of frustration and pain. "I was going to tell you." "When?" she demanded. "After we got engaged? After we got married? Or were you just going to let me find out when it was too late?" "Angela, I didn't want to lose you," he said desperately. She let out a bitter laugh, stepping back. "You didn't want to lose me, so you lied to me?" "I didn't lie," he said, voice raw. He stopped, shaking his head. "I was afraid. I thought if I told you, you'd leave." Angela felt something inside her crack. Because he was right? She might have left. She might have needed time. But now it wasn't just the truth that hurt. It was the fact that he never trusted her with it. "How could you think so little of me?" she whispered. Akira reached for her. "Angela!" She flinched, and that broke him. For the first time, he saw it. The trust that had taken months to build, shattered in an instant. Angela wrapped her arms around herself, blinking back the burn in her eyes. "I need time," she murmured. Akira's chest tightened. "Angela, please." But she was already stepping back, already breaking away. And as she turned and walked out the door, Akira realized he had just lost the only thing that had ever mattered. Akira Kazuya had always been unshakable. A man who moved through the world with purpose, control, and power. But tonight, he felt like a ghost inside his own skin. The city lights outside his penthouse window blurred as he drank himself into numbness. Angela was gone. The only woman who had ever seen him, ever loved him beyond his wealth and reputation, had walked away. And he had no one to blame but himself. He squeezed his eyes shut, his fingers curling into fists against the counter. "You were never meant to be the heir, Akira. You're just a failure hiding behind a name that isn't even yours to claim." His stepmother's words from years ago echoed in his head, relentless, taunting. She had been right all along. He was nothing. Nothing without his inheritance. Nothing without his father's approval. Nothing without Angela. And now, he had lost everything. Asahi found him like that, sitting on the floor of his penthouse, surrounded by empty whiskey bottles, his tie loosened, his head hanging low. Akira didn't look up as Asahi stepped inside. "Get out," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Asahi shut the door behind him and crossed his arms. "Yeah, no." Akira let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. I heard what you said, Asahi cut him off, but I don't take orders from drunk idiots who are throwing their lives away. Akira clenched his jaw. Leave me alone. You think I'm just gonna stand back and watch you self-destruct? Asahi shot back. You think this is what Angela would want? At her name, Akira flinched. Something inside him fractured completely. His hand lashed out, knocking over one of the glasses on the floor. Don't say her name. Silence. Then, softer this time, broken. Don't say her name. Asahi's expression shifted. The anger faded, replaced by something else. Understanding. Akira wasn't just drunk. He was spiraling. For the first time in his life, Akira Kazuya had lost, and he didn't know how to survive it. Masaki Kazuya was a woman who knew when to strike, and tonight she had found her moment. She watched Akira stumble through the corridors of the Kazuya estate, his suit disheveled, the shadows under his eyes deeper than she had ever seen them. Pathetic, like a man on the verge of breaking. A leader cannot afford weakness. Her husband had said those words once, and Akira was drowning in it. She stepped forward, her voice silken, laced with poison. How tragic, she mused, tilting her head. All these years pretending to be untouchable, and in the end, a woman was all it took to bring you to your knees. Akira stopped walking. His hands tightened into fists. Masaki smirked. You never deserved this empire, Akira, and now you've proven it. His breath was uneven, his entire body tensed as if ready for a fight. But Masaki wasn't done. You think your father built this company on love, on kindness? She scoffed. He built it with power, and power is something you've never understood. She leaned in, voice sharp as a blade, which is why soon this empire will be mine, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. She expected him to fight back, to lash out, to threaten. But for the first time, Akira said nothing, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure he had the strength to fight anymore. You're gonna let her win? Asahi's voice was sharp, furious, as he slammed a folder onto Akira's desk. Akira barely looked up. What do you want from me? He muttered, rubbing a hand over his face. I want you to stop being a coward, Asahi shot back. I want you to get off your ass and fight for what's yours. Akira laughed dryly. What's mine? I don't have anything left, Asahi. You have everything left, Asahi growled, but you're too busy feeling sorry for yourself to see it. Akira exhaled sharply. You don't get it. Don't I? Asahi's jaw tightened. You think I don't know what it's like to lose someone? To watch the person you love walk away because of your own damn mistakes? Akira finally looked up at him, something unreadable in his gaze. Asahi shook his head. Angela didn't leave because of your secret. She left because you didn't trust her enough to tell her. That's what broke her, Akira. Not the truth, the lie. Akira's chest tightened. He knew. God, he knew. But it didn't matter anymore. She's not coming back, Akira muttered, his voice raw. Not if you don't fight for her, Asahi countered. Not if you keep drinking yourself into a grave and letting that witch Masaki take what's yours. Akira said nothing, so Asahi took a step closer. Look at me, he demanded. Akira didn't move. Asahi slammed his fist onto the desk. I said look at me. Slowly, Akira lifted his gaze, and for the first time, Asahi saw something he had never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. Because Akira had no idea how to fix this. He had never been this vulnerable, and Asahi refused to let him drown in it. You lost her, Asahi said, his voice steady now. Fine. You lost her because you were afraid, because you didn't think she'd love you despite it. But you have a choice now, Akira. Akira swallowed, his hands shaking slightly. And what's that? Asahi leaned forward. You can either let the fear win and let your family take everything from you. A pause. Or you can be the man Angela fell in love with and fight like hell to get her back. Akira closed his eyes, his mind a war zone. Then he took a breath. Deep, steady, controlled. And when he opened his eyes, the Akira Kazuya that Masaki wanted to break was gone, and in his place, as a man ready for war. Angela had never known silence could be this loud. She sat by her apartment window, staring at the Tokyo skyline, the same view she had once watched with Akira by her side. Now the city lights felt colder, distant, empty. Her phone sat beside her, untouched. No calls, no messages. He hadn't tried to reach her, and maybe that hurt the most, because Akira Kazuya never gave up on anything. Yet, here she was, alone. And it wasn't because he stopped loving her. It was because she had walked away. How could you think so little of me? Her own words haunted her. At the time, she had meant them. The pain, the betrayal, it had been overwhelming. But now, sitting alone in the quiet of her apartment, she saw it differently. Akira had never played with her heart. He had protected it. Even when he should have told her the truth, he wasn't being cruel. He was being afraid. Afraid of losing her. Afraid that she would look at him differently. And instead of believing in him, she had left. She closed her eyes, pressing a hand to her chest. I love you. His voice echoed in her memory, so raw, so desperate. Had she been wrong? Had she let her own fears blind her to the truth? Angela pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through the old articles, the rumors, the tabloid headlines. Casanova CEO spotted with another model when will Akira Kazuya settle down? Tokyo's most eligible billionaire, a lover of many, a commitment to none. She had heard it all, believed it all. But now she saw the truth. Akira was never the man they made him out to be. The women, the endless string of so-called lovers, it had never been about pleasure. It had never been about conquest. It had been a shield, a way to protect himself from a world that demanded an air he could never give, a way to hide his pain in plain sight. And she had judged him for it. Angela exhaled shakily, gripping her phone. She had been so blind. Memories crashed into her, one after another. The way he always made sure she ate. The way he never raised his voice at her, even when she challenged him. The way he had held her like she was the only thing that kept him from breaking. This wasn't just a man who loved her. This was a man who had never known how to love, until her. And when he finally did, he had loved her so much, he had been willing to lose her rather than let her suffer because of him. Her vision blurred with tears. You think my family will accept that? They will never accept you without an heir. They will never accept me. Akira had never once doubted his love for her, but he had doubted whether he was worthy of her. She had spent so much time thinking he had betrayed her trust that she hadn't realized. She had betrayed his. She had walked away when he needed her the most. Angela covered her face with her hands, a sob breaking past her lips. By the time morning came, Angela knew. She knew what she had to do. She had spent her whole life running from pain, running from heartbreak. And Akira had spent his whole life believing love was something he could never truly have. But she had loved him. She still loved him. And now she had to fight for him the way he had always fought for her. Angela took a deep breath, wiping her tears. Then she grabbed her phone. Because this time, She was going to be the one who didn't walk away. Angela didn't hesitate this time. No more second guessing. No more doubts. No more running. She had walked away from Akira once, but she would not make the same mistake again. This time, she would fight. She would show him that love wasn't something he had to earn. He had always been enough. And so, she stood outside his penthouse, heart pounding, hands trembling. One deep breath. Then she knocked. Akira sat in his dark penthouse, the glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The city outside kept moving, kept breathing, but inside, everything felt still, empty. He had prepared himself for this, for the silence, for the loneliness, for the reality that Angela was gone and wasn't coming back. And then, the knock. Akira's breath caught. He must have imagined it. But then it came again, steady, firm, real. His heart slammed against his ribs. Slowly he stood, his steps unsteady as he moved toward the door. And when he opened it, she was there, Angela, standing in the hallway, eyes full of determination and something even stronger, love. Akira swallowed hard, gripping the doorframe as if to ground himself. Angela? His voice was raw, almost broken. She exhaled shakily. Hi. A beat of silence stretched between them. Then, Akira did what he had been terrified to do for weeks. He let himself hope. Angela stepped inside, her presence filling the empty space he had been drowning in. Akira's pulse was a war drum. He didn't deserve this, didn't deserve her. You shouldn't be here, he muttered, turning away. Angela's gaze didn't waver. I should have never left. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Angela, She didn't let him finish. Instead, she walked straight to him, took his face in her hands, and forced him to look at her. And in that moment, Akira Kazuya broke. His walls crumbled, his carefully built armor shattered beneath her touch. His hands came up, hesitating, afraid to hold her, afraid she would disappear. Angela, he whispered, his voice barely holding together. Why are you here? Her eyes burned with emotion. Because I love you. Akira's breath hitched. But She cut him off. I don't care, she said fiercely. I don't care about your family. I don't care about their traditions, their expectations. I don't care that you can't give them what they want. Her hand slid to his chest, over the heart that had only ever beaten for her. You are not defined by this, Akira. You are not less of a man. You are not less worthy of love. Akira's body trembled beneath her touch. But you deserve a family, he whispered. You deserve more than me. Angela shook her head. You are my family. The words hit him like a tidal wave. Raw. Unshakable. True. Tears burned behind his eyes, but he didn't fight them. Angela! His voice cracked. She smiled softly. You're stuck with me, Kazuya. And then she kissed him. Not out of desperation, not out of fear, but because this love was real. Because she was his, and he was hers. Because she was home. And for the first time in his life, Akira finally let himself believe it. Akira had never been a man of hesitation. He had built empires, made impossible decisions, and survived battles both in business and in his own heart. But this was the most important decision of his life. He took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he held the velvet box. Angela stood on the rooftop of their favorite spot, overlooking the Tokyo skyline, the same place where they had once shared quiet conversations and stolen glances. Now she turned to him, confused by his sudden silence. Akira! He exhaled sharply. God, she was beautiful. Strong. Unwavering. His. Angela, he said, voice low but steady, I've spent my whole life believing that love was something I could never have, that I was broken, that I wasn't enough. She softened instantly, stepping closer, ready to comfort him as she always did, but this time he wouldn't let her carry him. This time, he had something to offer her. He dropped to one knee. Angela froze, her breath hitched, eyes widening. Akira, she murmured. You saved me, he continued, voice rough with emotion. You showed me that I wasn't just the heir to an empire or a man with an impossible burden. You showed me that I was worthy of love. He opened the box, revealing the ring he had designed himself. Simple, elegant, a perfect fusion of Japanese and African craftsmanship. Angela Olsen, he said, his hands shaking slightly despite himself. Will you marry me? Angela sucked in a breath, her hands covering her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. Are you serious? She whispered. Akira chuckled, though his voice shook. More than I've ever been about anything in my life. She broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she let out a breathless, shaky laugh. Then she dropped to her knees with him and threw her arms around his neck. Yes, she whispered against his skin. Yes, Akira Kazuya. 1,000 times. Yes. He let out a deep, shaky breath, and for the first time, he felt truly free. Their wedding was a collision of worlds, two cultures woven together in the most breathtaking way. Angela walked down the aisle in a white lace African-style gown with delicate Japanese embroidery woven into the fabric. Akira wore a modern black kimono, accented with gold, a nod to his heritage but tailored to honor the woman he was marrying. The venue was decorated with a perfect blend of Japanese cherry blossoms and vibrant African colors, symbolizing the union of two souls from different worlds. Mr. Hinata and Fumiko stood proudly at the front, beaming like proud parents. Asahi smirked as he watched Akira wipe his eyes discreetly when Angela reached the altar. You're crying, Asahi whispered. Shut up, Akira murmured, his voice breaking slightly. Then, as Angela placed her hands in his, everything else faded. It was just her, his love, his partner, his home. They exchanged vows, not just words, but promises. A promise to fight for each other. A promise to never let fear dictate their love. A promise that, no matter what came their way, they would face it together. And when Akira kissed his bride, the whole world disappeared. 1 week after their wedding, Angela sat in their new home, unwrapping the last of their gifts. Mr. Hinata and Fumiko gave us this one, she murmured, carefully removing the wrapping. Akira, sitting beside her, glanced over. What is it? Angela gasped softly. It was a Bible, a simple, well-bound leather Bible. A note from Fumiko Hinata was tucked inside. May this always remind you of who you are, where you came from, and the love that has always been with you. Her fingers traced the cover, her breath hitching as old memories surfaced. Angela had forgotten. She had buried it beneath the weight of life, beneath the years of struggle and ambition. But now it all came rushing back. Tears welled in her eyes. Akira noticed instantly. Angela? His voice was soft, concerned. She couldn't speak, could only shake her head as the tears slipped free. A shuddering breath escaped her lips. Memories rushed back. The smell of Sunday mornings with Grandma Gina. The warmth of sitting in a small church, her grandmother's wrinkled hands holding hers as they prayed. The songs, the faith, the peace. It had been so long. So long since she had prayed. So long since she had even thought about God. So long since she had felt anything like this. Tears welled up in her eyes. Akira immediately pulled her into his arms. Angela, he murmured, worried. What's wrong? She shook her head against his chest. Nothing. I just... She let out a soft, watery laugh. I forgot. I forgot what this used to mean to me. Akira glanced down at the book in her hands, his expression unreadable. He had never been religious. He had never believed in anything beyond what he could see, touch, and control. But as Angela trembled in his arms, as she clutched the Bible like it was something precious, he realized it mattered to her. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers. He just held her, because he couldn't bear to see tears in his wife's eyes. That evening, Angela called Fumiko. She had to thank her. She had to tell her how much this meant. But when Fumiko answered, Angela's voice cracked with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. You have no idea how much this means to me. Fumiko's voice was warm. Angela, I was just listening to my heart when I bought that for you. I'm so glad it spoke to yours too. Angela wiped at her tears. I want to see you. Fumiko's smile was almost audible through the phone. Then come to church with me this weekend. There's a conference. I think you'll love it. Angela hesitated for only a second. Then, I'd love to, she said. She glanced at Akira, who had been listening quietly. He raised an eyebrow. So, you're going to a church conference? Angela nodded. Then, to her absolute shock, Akira shrugged. All right, he said casually. I'll come with you. Angela blinked. You will? Akira smirked. It makes you happy, doesn't it? She smiled, pressing a kiss to his cheek. Yes, it really does. And Akira, for all his disbelief in God, for all the years he had lived without faith, cleared his schedule for the weekend. Because if Angela's faith meant something to her, then it meant something to him too. Akira Kazuya had attended countless conferences in his life. Business summits, shareholder meetings, leadership panels where the most powerful men in the world dictated the future of their industries. He had walked into every one of them as the man in control. But this was different. From the moment they stepped into the church, he felt something shift. It wasn't the grandeur of a corporate empire. It wasn't the sharp, calculating energy of negotiations. It was peace, something gentler, yet infinitely more powerful, and he had no idea how to process it. Fumiko welcomed them with the warmth of a mother. She had reserved their seats, guiding them toward the front, smiling at Angela's nervous excitement and Akira's hesitant silence. When the minister stepped onto the podium, the atmosphere changed. Akira had seen men command rooms before, CEOs, executives, powerful leaders, but this was different. It wasn't authority that the minister carried. It was assurance, a kind of certainty that wasn't built on money, power, or influence. It was something deeper. And then he spoke. For the Lord is good, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endures to all generations. Psalm, chapter 100 at verse 5. Akira felt something stir inside him. Then the minister's voice rang through the sanctuary. No matter how far we have gone in life, God is always waiting with open hands for us to return. Beside him, Angela trembled. Akira turned just in time to see tears slipping down her face. Angela. He reached for her hand. She shook her head, pressing her fingers against her lips, as if holding back a sob too deep to contain. It was as if the past she had buried, the faith she had forgotten, had been called out by name, had been waiting for her all this time. Pastor Mike stepped forward, his voice steady, resonating in a way that felt like it was meant just for Akira. I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore, with loving kindness, I have drawn you. Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 3. God is our Father, Pastor Mike continued, his tone unwavering, reaching into places Akira didn't even know existed. He loves us without conditions. We can always tell him whatever is troubling us, and he will listen. He will help us. Akira inhaled sharply, his fingers tightening around Angela's hand. But the next words hit him like an earthquake. The reason a lot of people run away from God is because they think he is mysterious. Pastor Mike's voice was firm, yet filled with understanding. But God is not mysterious. Akira leaned forward, his heart pounding. If you read his word, you will know him, Pastor Mike continued. You will find that out for yourself, and you will fall in love with his son, Jesus Christ. Akira stopped breathing. Love. That word had always been complicated for him. He had been raised in a family where love was currency, where it was used as a weapon, where he had to earn it. He had spent his whole life carrying pain alone, believing that no one cared. But now, could it be? Had he been wrong all along? Had there always been someone who cared? Someone whose love had been waiting for him, even when he didn't believe? He turned his head slightly. Angela was watching him, and in her eyes, he saw it. She knew. She could see the war inside him, because she had fought it too. The service ended, but Akira and Angela barely spoke on the way home. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was heavy, too full of emotions neither of them could name. That night, as they stepped into their apartment, Angela did something she hadn't done in years. She knelt by the couch, clasped her hands together, and prayed. Akira stood by the doorway watching her. Something inside him tightened painfully. Angela had always been his strength, his anchor, but now he saw it. She was drawing strength from something greater, and for the first time, he envied that. Angela turned her head, her gaze locking onto his. Her eyes were soft, inviting. You don't have to, she whispered, but if you want to, you can pray with me. Akira hesitated. Pray? He had never done that before. Not once. He had never spoken to a God he didn't believe in. But now, for the first time, he wanted to. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to know what it meant to have something to hold on to, something bigger than himself. Slowly, he stepped forward, and when Angela reached for his hand, he didn't pull away. The next morning, Angela turned to him over breakfast. The conference isn't over, she said gently. Akira raised an eyebrow. You want to go again? She smiled, tilting her head. We. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You know I don't. He stopped himself. Angela waited patiently. Akira sighed, staring down at his coffee. He could say no. He could shut this door before it ever opened. But when he looked at her, he knew. This woman, his wife, his home, his greatest love, had chosen him despite everything. Could he do the same for her? Could he take a step into something he didn't fully understand? Akira looked up, meeting her gaze. Then, with quiet certainty, he nodded. All right, he said. Let's go together. Angela's smile was bright enough to rival the morning sun. And as Akira reached for her hand, he realized something profound. Maybe he had been lost for a long time. But now he was finally ready to be found. The second day of the conference wasn't just another service. It was a firestorm. The atmosphere crackled with electricity, expectation, and something Akira couldn't quite name. People filled every seat, murmuring prayers, lifting their hands in worship, faces alight with something deeper than joy. It was faith. And then she stepped onto the stage, Pastor Trinity, an American preacher, but unlike anyone they had ever heard before, she wasn't soft-spoken. She wasn't quiet. She was a force. And when she spoke, it wasn't just words. It was fire. Pastor Trinity's voice boomed through the sanctuary. I dare you to believe God today." Angela felt something shift inside her. Akira sat up straighter, listening intently. Pastor Trinity's eyes scanned the room, filled with passion, conviction, certainty. "The reason many of you struggle to receive from God is because you've been surrounded by doubt for too long," she declared. "You've let the world tell you what is and isn't possible." Angela gripped Akira's hand. She knew this was for them. Akira stiffened, because that was him. All his life, he had believed in nothing but himself. All his life, he had been told his fate was already written. Pastor Trinity continued, her voice full of boldness. "But if you are in Christ, you are not just anyone. You are a child of God. You have every right to the higher life that Jesus brought." She turned, pacing the stage. "Jesus said in John chapter 10, verse 10, 'I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it more abundantly.'" Her voice rang like thunder in their souls. If you are not happy with the way things are going in your life, do not assume that is what God wants for you. Pastor Trinity's voice rang through the room. "Take the matter to God in prayer. Fast if you can. Do not settle where you are if you feel there is more for you. There is no limit to your greatness in Christ. You don't have to settle. You don't have to accept pain as your portion. You don't have to stay in bondage, fear, or despair. God is your Father, and He loves you like you are the only person in the whole world." Angela felt something inside her ignite. For the first time, she truly believed Akira's case was not hopeless. And when she looked at him, she saw something she had never seen before, a flicker of hope. Pastor Trinity's voice rose with passion. In Mark chapter 11, verses 22 to 23, Jesus said, "Have faith in God. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Be lifted up and thrown into the sea,' and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them." We can use God's word to shape our lives in the direction we desire. Akira stared at her. He had spent his whole life using words to negotiate, to command, to build an empire. But he had never thought about using words to build himself. "Consider how Jesus used words," Pastor Trinity continued. "His words carried power, wisdom, and authority. In Mark chapter 11, he spoke to a fig tree, and it withered. He spoke to storms, and they obeyed. He spoke to demons, and they fled. He said, 'You shall have what you say.'" Angela felt goosebumps rise on her skin. Akira was silent, but his mind was racing. Could it really be true? Could his words, his faith, his belief change his life? Had he been living under a lie all this time? Had he been settling for defeat when victory was always within his reach? Akira's chest tightened. Could it be? All his life he had believed that life was fixed, that fate was cold and unchangeable, that his suffering was permanent. But now, Pastor Trinity was saying otherwise. She pointed at the congregation. "Your words have power," she declared. "How did God create the world?" She paused, then answered herself. "With words." Angela inhaled sharply. "Genesis tells us that the world was a chaotic mass," Pastor Trinity continued, "but God spoke, and order came out of chaos, light out of darkness, life out of nothingness." She turned again, locking eyes with the crowd. "That means your words shape your life. Stop agreeing with defeat." The sanctuary erupted with amens. Akira swallowed hard. He had spent his whole life accepting what he was told was impossible, that he would never be enough, that he would never inherit his father's empire, that he would never be able to have a family of his own. But now, was it a lie? Had he been living in chains that were never locked in the first place? Angela's heart pounded. Since the day Akira had told her his secret, she had silently accepted their fate. She loved him. That would never change. But she had resigned herself to the fact that children would never be in their future. She had never considered that there could be another way. But these past 2 days, hearing God's word, seeing Akira's spirit stir in a way she had never seen before, it made her believe again, made her hope. Maybe their story wasn't over. Maybe God could still write something new. Then it happened. Pastor Trinity stepped forward, holding the mic close. "Some of you today have been far from God," she said, her voice steady. "You've been wandering, searching, believing you had to do life alone." Akira's breathing shallowed. "But God is calling you back, right here, right now. You don't have to carry the weight alone anymore." Angela's chest ached. She knew. She knew Akira felt it. Pastor Trinity's eyes scanned the room. "If you want to receive Jesus, if you want to begin a life where you don't have to fight alone anymore, come forward." Silence. Then Angela stood, and beside her, Akira stood too. His legs moved before his mind could argue. His heart pulled him forward before logic could stop him. Angela reached for his hand. He grasped hers tightly, and together they stepped into the unknown. They reached the altar, standing among dozens of others. But at that moment, it felt like it was just the two of them. Pastor Trinity smiled, her gaze soft. "Say this with me," she said. And with his wife at his side, Akira opened his mouth and spoke words he never thought he would say. "Lord Jesus, I believe in you. I believe you died for my sins and rose again to give me new life. I accept you as my Lord and Savior. Come into my heart. Change me. Make me new." The moment the prayer ended, Angela turned to Akira, tears streaming down her face. He looked at her, his own eyes wet, his heart full, his soul finally at peace. She threw her arms around him, and for the first time in his life, Akira Kazuya felt truly, completely free. After the conference, everything changed. Akira and Angela dove headfirst into God's Word, together. They weren't just reading the Bible, they were living it. They would wake up early, sit together on the couch, and pore over Scripture, letting the words soak into their hearts. They prayed together before work. They spoke God's promises over their lives. They held hands at night and thanked Him for everything, before even seeing the results. "If God's word is as powerful as we heard," Angela had said one night, looking at Akira with unwavering conviction, "then we have to practice it. We have to live it." And so she did. Angela became fearless. She would speak over Akira's life every single day. She wrote down scriptures that declared healing, strength, and restoration. She filled the house with Bible verses, on the mirrors, inside his car, tucked in his office drawers, even inside his wallet. Akira had never seen anything like it. At first, it was unfamiliar, but then it became a part of him. One day, Akira found himself reaching for one of those notes in his office. It read, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Matthew chapter 19, verse 26. He stared at the words. Could it really be true? Could God truly rewrite his story? Slowly, something shifted inside Akira too. At first, he prayed because Angela wanted him to, but soon, he prayed because he wanted to. He found himself waking up at night, unable to ignore the pull in his spirit. And so he would sit on the edge of the bed, whispering prayers, not out of habit, but out of longing. "God, I don't know how to do this. I don't even know if I fully believe yet. But if you are who you say you are, show me." And then, one night, everything changed. It was past midnight when Akira woke up to an empty bed. The room was dark, but he could hear something faint, something broken. He followed the sound, his heartbeat quickening, and then He saw her. Angela was kneeling in the living room, her hands clasped tightly, her head bowed, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't just praying, she was pleading. God, please forgive me for running away from you. Akira's breath caught. I love Akira very much, more than I ever thought possible. He is a great person, Lord, but he has been carrying this burden all his life. Angela's voice shook as she wept. I want to carry his child. I want to give him the family he dreams of. But God, the doctors say it's impossible. His family is against adoption, and it wouldn't be fair to adopt a child and not fully love and care for them. Akira felt his knees go weak. But you, Lord, I have seen what you can do. You gave Hannah a son. You gave Sarah a son in her old age. You even put a child in the womb of a virgin girl. You can do anything, Lord. Angela's voice rose with conviction. It doesn't matter what the doctors say, God. I am his wife, and I believe you can rewrite our story. And that was it. That was the moment Akira broke. Tears blurred Akira's vision as he stepped forward without thinking. Before Angela could even react, he dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around her. She gasped softly, startled. Akira! He held her tightly, his face buried in her shoulder, his breath shaky. Angela, his voice cracked. Are you okay? Are you regretting marrying me? Angela pulled back slightly, cupping his face in her hands. Her eyes were still wet, but they held nothing but love. Regret, she whispered. Nothing like that. She wiped his tears away, her thumb tracing his cheek. I just needed to pour out my heart to God, she murmured. Akira swallowed hard. But his voice was raw, filled with the kind of vulnerability he had never allowed himself to show. Angela, do you really believe? Do you really think God can do this for us? Angela held his gaze, unwavering. If he did it for others, she whispered, why won't he do it for us? Her words hit him like a wave. Why not? Why couldn't he believe? Wasn't it written in Genesis 1:28, the very scripture he had read the other night? God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply. Then why? Why was his case different? He had spent years believing the doctors, years believing in what science said, years believing that his fate was set in stone. But now, Angela's voice broke through the storm in his mind. We must keep the faith, Akira. She took his hands, squeezing them so tightly it was as if she was holding on to him for dear life. I believe God will do it for us. And in that moment, for the first time in his life, Akira wanted to believe too. So he did the only thing that made sense. He bowed his head beside his wife, closed his eyes and prayed, God, if you're really there, if you really hear us, we are trusting you for a miracle. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to hope. The more Akira and Angela walked in faith, the stronger they became. They didn't just believe, they lived it. They fasted together, setting aside days to seek God more deeply. They gave together, sowing seeds and partnering in the distribution of Bibles and Christian materials. They served together, attending every church program, volunteering, doing whatever they could for the kingdom of God. It wasn't just about asking for a miracle anymore. It was about becoming the kind of people God wanted them to be. Their faith was strengthened by the powerful testimonies they found. Late at night, they would sit together, watching YouTube videos of people sharing their stories, people who had faced the impossible, and yet God had made a way. One evening, Angela turned to Akira after watching a testimony about a woman who had conceived after 10 years of waiting. Do you see that? She whispered, eyes shining. 10 years, and look what God did for her. Akira, his heart swelling with a faith he was still learning to hold on to, nodded. If he did it for her, he murmured, why won't he do it for us? Angela smiled. Exactly. And just like that, hope took deeper root. One quiet afternoon, Angela sat in their home, her Bible open before her. She had been reading about Abraham, about how God called him the father of many nations, even when he had no child. Her eyes drifted across the room until they landed on the empty guest room. A thought flickered through her mind. Turn it into a nursery. Angela froze. The idea was ridiculous. Why prepare a nursery when there was no baby? She shook her head. No, that's foolish. But then, a whisper in her spirit, faith is about doing. Her heartbeat quickened. God is a faith God. He calls things that are not as though they are. Angela stood up. She looked at the guest room again, and then she moved. She grabbed a box and started emptying the room, removing everything that didn't belong in a nursery. By the time Akira got home that evening, he stared in shock. Angela was dragging out furniture, reorganizing, setting things in place. His brows furrowed. Angela, what are you doing? She turned to him, a playful glint in her eyes. Turning this into a nursery. Akira blinked, then let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. But he rubbed the back of his neck. Angela, this doesn't make sense. Angela simply smiled. Faith doesn't always make sense. And so they did it together. They picked out soft pastel colors for the walls. They set up a crib, a rocking chair, and small shelves for toys. They even bought baby clothes, tiny outfits that made Akira's heart ache with longing. But it wasn't painful longing anymore. It was hope. When they stepped back, admiring the finished nursery, Angela turned to Akira. How do you feel? She asked softly. Akira looked around, taking in the small room that now held a future they couldn't yet see. He exhaled deeply, nodding. I feel, he swallowed, like I'm finally starting to believe. Angela smiled, hugging him tight. Then it's working. But Angela wasn't done. One morning, she placed an online order. A few days later, when the package arrived, she ripped it open with excitement. Akira raised an eyebrow as she pulled something out. A fake pregnancy belly. Angela grinned, holding it up. This is the next step. Akira's jaw dropped. You're joking. Nope, she said, strapping it on. If we're believing, we have to act like it. Akira stared at her for a long moment. Then he burst out laughing. You're insane. Angela shrugged. Maybe, but faith is bold. Akira exhaled, running a hand down his face. And then, despite himself, he smiled, because deep down, he knew something had changed in both of them. As the days passed, Angela wore the belly at home, acting like a pregnant woman. Akira played along. He would bring her snacks, rub her back, and joke about how she was getting too heavy to carry. Angela would laugh, swatting his arm. You better get used to it. And then, one night, she turned to him and said, We need a name. Akira looked up from the Bible he had been reading. A name? For the baby. His heart stopped. The baby. Not if we have a baby. When. Angela smiled. If it's a boy, we'll name him Isaac. Akira's lips parted slightly. Isaac? He swallowed hard. Like the child God gave to Abraham and Sarah. Exactly. Angela took his hand, lacing their fingers together. And if it's a girl, she whispered, we'll call her Evidence. Akira's chest tightened. He looked into his wife's eyes, his heart swelling with a feeling he had never known before. Evidence, he repeated softly, because she'll be the proof of God's promise to us. Angela nodded. A long silence stretched between them, thick with faith, thick with hope. And then Akira did something he never thought he would do. He reached for Angela's hands, bowed his head, and prayed, God, we don't know when, but we believe. We believe you are able, and we trust you. Angela squeezed his hands. And we are ready to receive. And with that, they held on to faith, not knowing when the promise would come, but knowing it already belonged to them. They continued to trust God's word and his timing. It wasn't always easy. There were days when fear whispered lies, nights when doubts tried to creep in, but every time their faith wavered, they only had to look around, at the Bible verses covering their walls, at the crib in the nursery waiting for its promise, at the scriptures taped to the mirrors, the doors, the bedside table. God is not dead, Angela said. He is still on the throne. And as long as God is alive, we will hold on to his eternal word, because he is a God who does the impossible. Meanwhile, Akira's stepmother continued her war against him. She threw everything she had at him, determined to take his inheritance. Scandals, lies, manipulation. But Akira had changed. He was no longer the man who fought battles with anger and revenge. He was a man who fought with wisdom, faith, and righteousness. With God's help and Angela's unwavering love and support, he stood his ground. And he won. His stepmother's schemes crumbled before her. The family empire remained in his hands. He knew why. Because God had written his destiny, not her. Their first wedding anniversary arrived, and Akira went to the ends of the earth to make it extraordinary. He surprised Angela with a romantic getaway, a candlelit dinner under the stars, and a love letter he had written by hand. I never knew love like this existed, he whispered as they danced slowly in the evening glow. Angela smiled up at him, tears glistening in her eyes. You were always worthy of love, Akira, she murmured. God just needed you to see it. Their love had become deeper than anything they had imagined. Not just love, a covenant, a bond that weathered storms and emerged stronger. 7 months after their first anniversary, Angela woke up feeling off. There was a nagging discomfort deep inside her. She had been feeling this way for days but ignored it. It wasn't the first time she had thought about taking a pregnancy test. She had done dozens before. And each time, the answer was the same. But this time was different, because she was on her period. It's impossible, she thought, brushing the idea aside. Yet, as the hours passed, the urge wouldn't go away. Her heart kept whispering, take the test. That morning, as Akira got ready for work, she forced a smile, not wanting to worry him. I'll stay home today, she said softly. Just a little headache. Akira frowned in concern. Are you sure? I can cancel my meetings. Angela shook her head quickly. No, I'll rest. Don't worry. Reluctantly, he kissed her forehead before heading out. And the moment the door closed, she went to take the test. Angela dropped to the floor. Her hands trembled violently as she stared at the test in front of her. Positive. She grabbed another one, took the test again. Positive. Another. Still positive. Her chest heaved as overwhelming emotions crashed into her. She was pregnant. But how? Her body was still going through her menstrual cycle. It didn't make sense. It didn't follow medical logic. But then, faith doesn't always make sense. Her hands clutched her Bible tightly, pressing it against her heart as fresh tears streamed down her face. She sobbed, rocking slightly, whispering over and over, Jesus did it. Jesus did it. At that moment, Angela didn't care about waiting. She needed Akira. Her fingers fumbled as she grabbed her phone, pressing the call button. The line barely rang twice before Akira's voice answered sharply. Angela, what's wrong? But Angela couldn't speak through the tears. Angela, talk to me. She gasped between sobs, trying to get the words out. "He did it," she finally whispered. "Akira, he did it." Akira's breath caught. "What?" "He did it." Angela sobbed harder. "God did it." The phone nearly slipped from Akira's grip. His world stilled. His heartbeat slammed in his ears. Asahi, sitting beside him in the meeting, frowned. "Akira, what's wrong?" But Akira was already pushing back his chair, standing up so fast it nearly toppled over. Without a word, he bolted out of the meeting. Akira drove faster than he ever had before. His hands gripped the steering wheel, his mind spinning. Angela's voice still echoed in his head. He did it. God did it. Could it be? Was it real? As he burst through the front door, his heart nearly stopped. Angela was sitting on the floor, tears still rolling down her face. Her Bible was clutched tightly to her chest. And in front of her, on the table, 3 pregnancy tests. Akira staggered forward. His throat closed up. His knees gave way. And before he could stop himself, he dropped to his knees before her. His eyes locked onto the tests, his vision blurred by tears. Angela reached for him, sobbing. He grabbed her, pulling her into his arms, holding onto her like she was his very breath. And in that moment, the truth hit him. The truth the world told him was impossible. The truth the doctor said would never happen. The truth God had spoken over them from the beginning. They were going to have a child. His voice trembled as he whispered against her hair. "Jesus did it." Angela sobbed harder, nodding. Jesus did it. And there, in the middle of their home, with tears streaming, hands shaking, hearts full, they fell to their knees together and thanked God for his faithfulness. Then Akira pulled back slightly, pressing his forehead against hers. "We have to go to the hospital," he whispered. Angela nodded, still crying. "Yes," she whispered. "But Akira, I already know." She smiled through her tears. "The doctors don't need to confirm it. God already did." Even though Angela and Akira already knew the truth, they still needed to see the doctor. So that morning, hand in hand, hearts full of faith, they walked into the hospital together. Angela could feel Akira's grip tightening as they sat in the waiting room. He was trying to stay calm, but she could feel his heartbeat, fast and heavy. She smiled, gently squeezing his hand. "Akira," she whispered, "no matter what they say, we already know." He exhaled deeply, nodding. "I know, but I still want to hear them say it." Angela chuckled softly. Soon they were taken into the ultrasound room. And then, there it was, the tiny rhythmic thump of their baby's heartbeat. Akira stared at the screen, frozen in awe. His grip on Angela's hand tightened even more. The doctor smiled. "Your baby is strong and growing well." Angela let out a deep, relieved sigh. "And my menstrual cycle?" The doctor shook her head, still smiling. "It had no negative effect on the baby whatsoever. Everything is perfectly fine." Akira couldn't move, couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. Because there, on that screen, was their miracle. The proof that God had rewritten their story. And in that moment, Akira knew. Faith had won. From that day, Akira changed. He didn't just work less. He worked from home. Because there was nothing in the world more important than being there for his wife and child. Angela laughed one morning when she saw him set up his office right next to the nursery. "Are you ever going back to work?" she teased. Akira smirked. "I am working. Just from here." Angela shook her head, grinning. "I love you, you know that?" she said. Akira leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I know," he murmured, "and I love you more." The first time they did an ultrasound to see their baby, Akira felt something inside him shatter and rebuild all at once. Watching the screen, seeing the tiny form of their child, the movement, the life that was growing, it was a joy that words could never capture. Every doctor's visit became a celebration, hearing the baby's heartbeat, feeling the baby kick, watching Angela glow with motherhood. Each moment was proof that God had spoken over their lives and never gone back on his word. They kept declaring God's word over their child, even in the womb. Angela would wake up, place her hands on her belly, and speak life. "You will be strong, healthy, and filled with purpose," she whispered every morning. Akira would kneel beside her, pressing his lips to her belly. "You will fulfill God's purpose for your life. You are a child of promise," he murmured. "We love you, and God loves you even more." 9 months later, Angela grabbed Akira's arm tightly. "It's time," she gasped. Akira felt his heart stop, then explode into motion, rushing to the hospital, holding her hand, whispering words of prayer and encouragement through the pain. For hours, he stayed right beside her. And then, a tiny, beautiful cry filled the air. Akira froze. His breath hitched as the doctor placed a small, delicate baby into his arms. His daughter, their miracle. Angela watched through tears as Akira's hands trembled, his lips parting in disbelief. She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. Angela smiled weakly, her heart bursting with joy. "She is the evidence that God truly answers prayers," she said softly. Akira lifted his teary gaze to his wife. And in that moment, everything in his world made sense. After Angela and the baby had fallen asleep, Akira stepped outside. His legs felt weak. His chest felt too tight. And before he could stop himself, he broke down in tears. His hands covered his face as he sobbed into the night air. Because this was beyond what he could have ever asked for. His best friend, Asahi, found him there. Akira didn't look up, just choked out, "She's here, my daughter. Asahi, she's here." Asahi's throat tightened. "Jesus did it," he murmured. Akira let out a broken laugh between tears. "Yeah," he whispered, "Jesus did it." When the time came, Akira brought his family home. Fumiko was always there to assist Angela, guiding her through the journey of being a first-time mom. Baby Evidence was healthy, strong, and growing beautifully. Every cry, every laugh, every tiny movement, it was all joy. They shared their testimony everywhere, telling others of God's faithfulness. "Hold on to faith," Angela would say, "even when it makes no sense, because God never lies." And then, another surprise. 9 months later, Angela woke up feeling that same strange sensation again. She didn't say anything at first, but as the days passed, the feeling grew stronger. So, one morning, she took another test, and the moment she saw the result, she screamed. Akira ran into the room, panicked. "Angela, what happened?" She turned around, grinning so wide her face hurt. She held up the test. Akira froze. Angela's eyes filled with tears. "Akira," she whispered, "we're having another baby." Akira's breath caught. His legs nearly gave out. "Wait, what?" Angela laughed and cried at the same time. "God did it again," she whispered. Akira grabbed her, lifting her into his arms as he spun her around. He couldn't contain his joy. They hadn't expected this to happen so quickly. But God had given them another child, and 9 months later, they welcomed their son into the world, their promised son. They named him Isaac because, like Isaac in the Bible, he was the child of laughter, the child of joy, the child of promise. And with that, their family was complete. full of faith, full of love, full of God's undeniable, unstoppable, limitless power. The end.